Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new season of Broken Beautiful Me Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. There are people who walk into a room and just bring peace with them. Linda Feig Knipe is one of those people. Her story is not one of perfection, it is one of perseverance. It's of finding her voice after seasons of silence, of choosing gratitude when grief tried to take everything. Today, we sit down to talk about what it means to be broken and beautiful at the same time, and how healing often begins with a whisper of truth. I am so honored to welcome Linda to Broken Beautiful Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. And today I am so honored to have as a guest, Linda Feig Knipe. Linda is a retired high school counselor. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from SUNY Potsdam and a master's degree and certificate of advanced studies in counselor education from SUNY University of Buffalo. She's a proud Western New Yorker, and she dedicates her time to volunteering, traveling, and spending time with her grandchildren, family, and friends. She is a Rotarian, president of the board of directors of Go Art and Regional Arts Council, and an active church member. With a love for exploring the globe and meeting interesting people, Knipe now embarks on a new adventure with her first book, Braving Therapy. Welcome, Linda. I feel so honored to have you here today. I can't wait for our conversation.
Oh, hi, Kelly. I'm delighted to be here to talk with you.
So, just to kind of get us started, can you, just give us a little background and what brought you to the place where you said, okay, I'm going to write about braving therapy. Tell us a little bit about your story.
I've always wanted to write, but it takes discipline and planning. And what happened in the last 5 years, a lot of my life changed. I was on my own. My husband passed away. Ultimately, I had been talking with a friend of mine who was in an estranged marriage, and he was describing his wife and describing how difficult she was to deal with. But he also told me that she'd had a rape in her background from before he met her that she'd never dealt with. So we got talking about PTSD and about how that affects you and how it really insidiously affects the way that you deal with people in your life and try to keep control of everything. And right after that, I took a writing workshop that was saying, write what you know. And I knew this intimately, and it had just come up again. And so I had been talking about a lot of it. And that's really why I picked the topic to write about. However, I also feel it was kind of my destiny to write about this because I always felt like I learned so much. The book that I wrote is called Braving Therapy, and I learned so much in therapy, and I used all of that learning in all of my years as a school counselor to kind of be a companion for students and their families who were going through trauma. And I wanted to write it as a companion for people to pass along everything that I had learned.
That's beautiful. Well, first, I am very sorry for the loss of your husband.
Thank you.
Do you feel that grief can be a gateway to your next chapter in a way? Do you feel like it awakened something in you that allowed you to revisit these parts of your life?
Yes, I think that every new season of our lives opens up the opportunity to, my personal philosophy, embrace where you are. It was a very good opportunity to totally immerse myself into something. The writing took me over 2 years from the time I started writing. So it was a real immersive experience. And I also don't know that it's something that I would have delved into if my husband were still alive. I may have written about something else, but I also don't know that I would have put the time into it that was required until I was on my own.
I asked that question because my grief served as a gateway for me, and I always felt it made me more courageous about what I was going to put out in the world, I guess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm older now. And I have the wisdom of most of my life behind me to draw on. And honestly, there are a lot of things that I should probably talk about what my book's about. When I went to graduate school for counselor education, I was triggered. I had had a rape in my past when I was in my 20s. I actually had several. And because once you identify date rape as rape, so there were a couple. And I was triggered in a counselor theories class, and there was a lot of shame about it. Like I hadn't talked about it really. I didn't want to talk about it. But it got to a point where I had to. I couldn't go on in life, even especially that program, without dealing with all of that. But I still didn't talk about it. Then there was 20 years from the time I did all of that and had my counseling career to the time I wrote the book. And there was a lot of stuff in there that I had been committed my entire life to keeping hidden. And even though I talked about it in therapy and came to terms with it and was able to talk with myself about things, I still didn't really want to put it out into the world. But you're right. After my husband died and I was on my own and I was in my late 60s, and I just kind of felt like there wasn't a reason to hide stuff anymore. It didn't serve anybody. And it was really toxic. And the best thing that happened is I was watching Dr. Brene Brown, who is a prolific writer and a social researcher, and is very funny. So she's a lot of fun to watch on her talks. And she was talking on this Netflix special about kind of being in that position herself, where she was really embarrassed about something that had happened. A lot of people were talking online, and she was kind of going down a rabbit hole of looking things up online. And she came across Theodore Roosevelt's speech, which is known as the man in the arena. It was actually the speech, The Citizen and the Republic, that he gave at the Sorbonne in France in 1910. And what it said was that people are going to make comments about you. There are going to be trolls out there. The gist of it. There are going to be trolls that are always talking about what you're doing and judging you and everything. But if you're living your life all in, if you're fully in the arena of your life, you're going to have failures, but you're also going to have successes. And the only way to have the successes is to get in there and get bloodied and battered and beat up. And there will be people who will be stomping on you, but they're not living all in. They're just living, making judgments about what you're doing and not really living their own lives. So, and she said, so every morning I wake up now and I say to myself, I'm going to choose courage over comfort. And that's kind of my mantra for life now. She also said, if you live your life all in, you will fail. Not you might fail, but there are times you will fail. And that statement that she said hit me more than anything, because I thought there were things that I wrote in the book that I was never, ever, ever going to tell anybody ever. And I I was particularly worried about people that I knew or people in my community seeing it. I didn't really care anymore about everybody else, but I thought, well, okay. So if that's the ground rules for living my life all in, is that I will fail, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it, saying I'm going to get walked on by somebody. Somebody's going to really trash me, and that's okay, because that's just how you have to live your life all in. You have to accept that. And once I got to that point, nothing bothered me anymore. And the really funny thing was that never happened.
It's so funny because we oftentimes look at the worst case scenario when we're trying to step into something that could give us tremendous growth. And,
Yes.
all those scenarios, they don't usually happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just have to be brave enough. Yeah. Brené is such a force. And I've read many of her books, not all of them. She's written so many. But that statement about being in the arena, I watched that special on Netflix as well. And it struck me because you have to self-reflect when she talks about that. You have to ask yourself, am I in the arena or am I on the sidelines?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing for all of us to contemplate. So you put out your book. Talk to me about people's reaction to your stories and your guidance.
I was honestly astounded by people's reactions, because when I wrote the book, the direction that I was given was that you pick they call it an avatar. You pick very specifically who you are writing the book to. And so, as a school counselor who had worked with kids and adults within their families who had PTSD, who had been sexually assaulted, I really felt like that's who I was writing the book to. I originally had in my mind that it would be like a companion manual to therapy, to explaining what's going on and the way you can prepare yourself and all of the benefits, all of the ways you can make it beneficial to you. That was my intention. But when I started reading the reviews and when people started writing to me, those aren't the people that really wrote back to me. It was all of these other connections people were making to what I wrote about depression and anxiety and keeping things to ourselves, shame, just being embarrassed, having that little voice in your head that's always making derogatory comments.
Yeah.
And a big part of the book is not so much, I write about therapy and what it's like in therapy and the therapeutic conversations, but then every chapter, a good portion of the chapter is my takeaways, my learning, and how I was changing, how my perspective was shifting. And so I wrote a lot about what was going on in my own head as I was slowly changing. And people were really relating to that. People were writing to me constantly, and in the reviews on Amazon and Goodreads as well, about just kind of all of these aha moments of understanding about their own feelings of depression and beating themselves up, keeping things hidden, shame. That's what people were connecting to. It was really kind of amazing.
That is quite amazing that they, and I think reacting to your courage to share your own particular journey.
I think that was probably a surprise to people who had kept everything hidden in their lives, to have somebody who also, I was in therapy for a long time because I was very committed to keeping things hidden. And it's like you can't talk. You can't talk about that stuff because you can't even deal with it. You can't even face it yourself. So it's really difficult to talk about it. And I think it was kind of astounding to people that I not only got through therapy, but that I wrote a book about it.
How does it feel now that you have made that decision in life to just be open about who you are and what has happened to you? What's the difference in the level of peace you feel in your heart?
It's just more learning. It's just more learning in life that we need to share. I remember sitting in the therapist's office, and I had gone through life up until I was 40 years old by the time I was sitting there. And I had always been strong and self-sufficient and felt like I could get through, I could handle anything.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting there going, oh, we're not supposed to do it alone. We are supposed to share our thoughts and feelings and get other people's help and perspective and their own experience. And so that was enlightening when I was in therapy. But then, like, I went on with life, and I had a much healthier life after that. I was a much more authentic person. And, as a counselor, you have to be really curious to be a counselor. And so I got to talk with lots and lots of people, young people, their parents, other educators, about what was going on in their life. And you just do become wiser. But I think that putting the book out and finding out how people respond to it was the biggest aha of, oh, we need to talk about everything. We really
Yeah.
do.
So, your experience with a sexual assault in your 20s, how have people responded, in particular women? Is the stat 1 in 3, I believe, experience a sexual assault at some point in their lifetime? And I'm just wondering what the community of women who have been exposed to your book, what the feedback they've given you because of your courage to share.
I've had just a very few who have also shared that they had a sexual assault, but I have had some, and it did open up a discussion with their own partners, at least, um,
Right.
that had
Which is a
happened.
huge step. I
Yeah,
mean, just to disclose that even to the person who you would say is closest to you in life, um, that is a huge step.
yeah. More than that, I think I had women, especially, who talked about more of an understanding for other people that they knew, worries about their own kids. And I think even what I really had a lot of were people who related to the anxiety and depression portions, the chapters that I wrote in there, because the feelings are all the same. It doesn't matter what precipitates them. The feelings of anxiety and depression all kind of land the same way. And they really identified with that and what they may be able to do to get over it. And the biggest issue that I still have with depression, and that I fully understand, is how really hard it is to talk when you're depressed.
Yeah.
Like, when you're in the middle of depression, the last thing you feel like you can do is explain it to anybody. So it is a real challenge even to say to somebody, I've been feeling down. That's a real challenge, because it's going to open up a conversation that you are really reluctant to have. You just kind of want to curl up in a ball, and kind of like when you're sick, and hope it goes away.
And it's usually like you're thinking about something that keeps bubbling up. I mean, I'm just thinking about everybody has a personal journey at
Oh,
some
yeah.
point
Yeah.
with anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
And the thing that's bubbling up probably is ready to be dealt with.
Right.
Um,
I've realized that almost all of my depression is situational. And it's that something's happened that I've put aside and it festers. And when the festering turns into a real infection that starts really hurting, that's when it bubbles up. But you're depressed. And by that time, and that was difficult because my husband was really good at sitting me down and saying what's going on, because my emotions would get very flat. And I don't have that anymore. And so now I do need to again reach out and say, I'm feeling badly.
yeah.
And I went on long enough one time that I went to my therapist. I see him maybe once or twice a year now. And after all these years, and he was like, wait, we've been through this. We went through therapy. You know, you need to talk to somebody when you're feeling this way. You wrote a book about it. So and I'm like, I know. So I still am working on being better about that.
I mean, I think we're all perfectly imperfect, right?
Yes.
So and some lessons like that, and that would be something I'm still relearning.
Yeah.
Still,
We're
every
working in
time I get,
progress.
yeah, that's okay, because
Mm-hmm.
at least now you have the awareness of, okay, I'm supposed to be reaching out to people. You have the
Right.
knowledge behind you of what it doesn't make it easier to do,
Right.
but you do have that information and that ability. What I love about your book is I think that not only do you share your story and you share some like a roadmap for people, but you are giving them permission to make a step forward, whether that be through therapy or reaching out to a loved one. So by sharing your story, maybe they will feel brave enough to take that next step. And there's no greater gift than that.
Yeah, that's definitely my hope. And I've said to many people, people always say to me, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And it's like, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to wish it on anyone, but every one of us, my feeling is the great adventure of life is that we have to go through hard stuff. And that's where we learn the most, that's where we grow. And everybody has really hard things that they have to go through. And I was reading something just the other day that said if we had the benefit of foresight, we would probably choose not to live our most vibrant life, because there's going to be bad stuff that happens. And we're going to get into bad situations, but you can't live your life trying to avoid every bad thing, because that's not even the purpose of life. I am convinced that our job on this earth is to go through hard times and learn how to cope with them and grow from the experiences. Because when everything is rosy, I don't think we're doing a lot of growing.
No.
It's like a vacation.
Yeah, it's just, and I think it's just human nature that we tuck away things that we need to deal with when things are going well and say, yeah, I'll get to that. I am going to
Right.
look at that.
Right.
But we never kind of return to it until we are forced to sometimes.
Yeah.
I just want to read a couple of your quotes that are connected to what you just said. Gratitude doesn't erase grief. It just gives it a softer place to land. I mean, that's just so beautiful. Healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means becoming someone new with tenderness. And that with tenderness part, I think is the most important. When I read that this morning, it feels like it's the most important part for me, because we do change when things happen to us. And it takes commitment to do that with tenderness. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I hear more and more people talking about giving grace and giving grace to yourself. And that is approaching life, approaching other people, and approaching yourself with more tenderness, because it's hard. Life is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't do it perfectly. And one of the difficulties with issues of trauma is that you become more controlling. You try and control things in your own life, and you try and control yourself, and you try and control other people, because you feel like if you can keep control of stuff, you can control bad stuff that might happen. And you can't do that. You can try, but it makes you more miserable. And every time you're not able to keep control, or things don't go the way you want, you tend, or a lot of people tend, to beat themselves up in their own heads. And that's where the tenderness or the grace comes in, because this is what life is. This is what being human is. We're not
Mm-hmm.
perfect. We cannot control everything.
No.
And the more that you try, the more you're going to fail at it. So letting up and giving yourself grace for just being human and moving forward that way, for me, I'm much happier in these years than I was before. I'm more
Mm-hmm.
accepting. I'm more accepting of myself. I'm more accepting of other people. I really work at being loving in a charitable way towards everybody, no matter where they are on their journey,
Right.
and seeing it that way.
So, what suggestions can you give our listeners who, they're working through some trauma? They're feeling very anxious and depressed, which is an epidemic in this world right now. What advice would you give them about connecting with people in their community? So, going back to the conversation we were talking about, your therapist saying, you're supposed to reach out to people. And that is something that can be difficult to do when you're struggling. So, what
Right.
advice would you give our listeners about connection and the importance of it?
I think going back to the purpose of the book, which is Braving Therapy, I believe that if the idea has ever crossed your mind that maybe you should talk to someone, that maybe talking to a therapist would be a good idea, if that has even been a fleeting thought in your mind, it is probably exactly what you should do. You should listen to yourself, for starters. And there will be all sorts of obstacles that you will start throwing up and arguing with yourself about. And there's an entire chapter in the book that deals with all of the obstacles that you throw up in front of you about therapy. But finding a therapist is a great thing to do, because it is somebody who will accompany you on the journey with unconditional regard. Like,
Mhm.
unconditional positive regard is what you should get from a therapist. And a lot of times, if you have a friend or family member who can give you unconditional positive regard, meaning you don't feel any judgment when you talk about things, that is great, and you're very lucky. But a lot of times you're still worried about being judged. So a good therapist is somebody who you go into the room, the door is closed, nobody else will know about what you say because it's completely confidential. And I was just thinking about this the other day. It's kind of like being with a good therapist is kind of like someone who is sitting in vigil with someone who is dying. You can't
Mhm.
stop the process. There's nothing you can say as the person that's there sitting with them to change what's going to happen. You're just being with them. And that's what a therapist is doing with someone who's really needing to explore. And they also have a lot of tools to be able to help you talk, to make it safe for you to talk, to make it you be able to deal yourself with what you're bringing up, because a lot of it is you can't even deal with looking at it yourself. And the therapist will have a lot of tools to help you look at things in a really safe way.
Mhm.
And when I say safe, I mean that you feel you're safe emotionally to be able to look at things you've never wanted to look at. So I would say if it's ever crossed your mind that maybe someone would be good to talk to, then there are a lot of places that you can find a good therapist. And if it's not the right therapist for you, you really should feel when you're talking to the right therapist, you're talking about the right stuff right away. And
Yeah.
that's how you'll know.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the unique practitioners where you do have to have an emotional component of comfort. There's a lot of other practitioners in healthcare or whatever industry, and you just want them to be proficient at what they're doing.
Right.
But with therapy, there's an emotional component. And do you feel like we are making positive strides? Over the past 5 years, you see, online options for therapy. You have doctors on demand,
Right.
psychiatrists who you can talk to online.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So the emotional connection is actually the biggest factor, the biggest healing factor or efficacy for if therapy is going to work for you or how it works. The connection is huge. So it is important to be with a therapist that you have good that you're have a good connection with. So when COVID started and my husband was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, I met with my therapist online a number of times. And while I choose most of the time, if I want to see him, to be sitting in his presence, online is the conversation is the same. And I just had my first online doctor's visit for a sinus infection that I have last week. And I needed to get in right away. And it was 45 minutes and it was great. So, and I do have therapist friends who do online therapy. And I think the connection is still there and the conversation is still the same. There is something to being in the presence of another person that's comforting, but
Mhm.
aside from that, a lot of times online therapy is the saving grace for a lot of people who either can't get out or they can't schedule it or they have kids or whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is hugely helpful.
Yeah. I would agree. I'm thinking, probably the person who's in a moderate or deep depression who maybe finds it difficult to even leave the house, that would be a positive way for them to kind of put the toe in the water and see
Right.
what
And I,
therapy can do.
and I want to say that online therapy with a licensed therapist is far, far, far better than using AI.
Yes.
That is not therapy, and you don't know what you're going to be told with AI.
Right.
And it's frightening. I would always say to somebody, you can use AI how to find a therapist, but not as a therapist.
Yeah. There was actually an article this weekend talking about that. There's a number of social media posts now and say, I gave up my therapist and I fixed my emotional problems in these easy steps with ChatGPT. It's like, oh my goodness, like that's.
So ChatGPT can give you good advice, but it could give you terrible advice. And when you're and nobody is looking over its shoulder. If you're able to start writing, I kept a journal for years, and that was a very helpful way to work out my emotions, but what I was thinking. But I also needed the physical presence of a person who could encourage me to do that, because one of the things I say in my book more than once is that if you are not getting anybody's perspective but your own, you're not getting anybody's perspective but your own. You're just going to stay in that same vicious circle of what you've been thinking, and it's very circular until you get other perspectives from other experiences and other wise people. So ChatGPT cannot give you that.
I think there are some marvelous uses for AI, but I think that we need to be tremendously careful with how we roll those out. And we definitely need to make sure that we keep our human connection with each other. I mean, it was kind of a disconnected place, this planet of ours before. Like we had so much connection, but feel lonely
Right.
because everything's online. And so now with AI added into the mix, I think we just really, as humans, need to make a commitment to stay connected to each other.
Yeah. And I've been kind of really delving into just the science of consciousness and the research that's being done now about our connections to each other. And it is what's conscious, and AI is not conscious.
Right.
I don't think. Somebody might argue with me, but that's very healing. Being with other living people is healing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and for people that are struggling with depression and anxiety issues, if it is getting too bad, if you are at the point where you're just, and a lot of times this happens, you start thinking, I'd rather not be here. The number 988 is what you want to call. It is the suicide prevention hotline. It is like 911, only for mental health and suicide prevention. So 988 is the number you can call, and they don't know who you are, but it will be somebody that you can talk to. So if you can't talk to anybody else and you're depressed, you can call 988 when it gets bad. But if you can break out of that staying inside yourself before it gets too bad and talk to somebody and just say, I've been feeling down, it's an opener.
Yeah. That's such important information. Thank you for mentioning that. And I'll make sure it's in the show notes as well, because you just reach out and take that first step. It's so important. And it's very easy to feel isolated when you are struggling. And I remember those dark days myself. And I was very fortunate to have people who listened and who reached out. And I went to therapy consistently. And I wouldn't be here without therapy.
Right. I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't be the person I am.
Right.
I feel like when I completed therapy and I made it all the way to where it's like, okay, I'm finally good. And I remember when I was in the middle of it, and it was a number of years for me because I was so reluctant to talk. I was so ashamed. I don't know what this shame thing that we carry is, but we're certainly tougher on ourselves than we are on anybody else. But when I got to the point where I had talked about everything that I'd ever hidden, and I was able to cry, hadn't been able to cry, and felt like I was finally done, I also felt like I was truly myself, like I could give myself grace. And I was able to move on in my life, and all sorts of good things came to me that I don't think would have come to me if I were still living behind a curtain.
Yes.
So I have to work at it. You have to work at it. I have to do healthy things. I have to be intentionally healthy, both mentally and physically.
Yeah.
It's not easy to keep moving in a positive direction. We need community. I have I'm a Weight Watcher. I have my Weight Watcher community, and man, I don't miss that meeting, because if I started missing meetings, I would just start gaining weight.
Yep.
So there are things that I need to do, and I need to, when I'm feeling blue, I was like, oh man, I really do just need to say to one of my friends or my sisters, I'm feeling down. So I make myself do it.
Again, that awareness of making the connection with I'm feeling down, I need to reach out. I think that's just a huge accomplishment
Yes.
for anybody going to therapy.
Yes.
Is just to realize that that is an option.
Right.
I want to ask a question. So you have such a wonderful professional background. And as a counselor, how does it feel for a counselor to go to therapy?
Oh my God. I had worked as a social worker in my earlier life, a social worker. Then I was a Red Cross director, which pushed me into the schools because I was working with a lot of people in emergency situations. And I realized that it was because of poor life decisions. And I thought maybe if I start working in the schools, I can alleviate some of that. So I had started a counselor education program when I was triggered in PTSD and had to go to therapy. So what was fascinating was that I was sitting in the patient chair while I was in class learning about therapy and being a therapist. I was like always kind of watching my therapist in almost an academic way too. like I felt like a fly on the wall watching the whole scenario, while I was also like in the throes of anxiety when I was trying to talk about myself. And it was just a fascinating perspective to be in that situation when I was taking classes for it.
Yeah.
And I did find myself channeling my therapist a lot as a counselor.
Yeah.
When I was working with kids. And I worked in a small rural school. And so we did a lot of personal counseling in addition to the school counseling.
Because I mean, in kids' lives, they're just, I wish we could all like send them back to when I was a kid. It was just so simple, right? There's the things that kids have to navigate these days.
More generally, yeah. I think it's funny. One of the counselors had a student come back and shadow her, and she said, "Wow, things have changed." And she said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Kids weren't like this when I was here when I was younger." And my colleague said, "Yeah, they were like this. You just didn't see them because we all grow up in such different situations." Yes. And I have to say, so I'll go back just to more than 50 years ago when I was a teenager, and I had a wonderful, loving family. And I would see people that didn't, like even friends that lived in not happy families. And I remember thinking, life is so unfair. I have this great situation, and from the time I was a teenager, had a purpose in my life to try and make life better for other people because I just didn't feel like it was fair. I feel like I got handed all the cards. And so I was lucky to grow up knowing what my purpose is. I worked in career counseling with a lot of kids who were very smart and didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. I always felt sorry for them.
You mentioned PTSD, and it is, we hear a lot. People say PTSD. You read it in the news. Can you speak to me about PTSD, or speak to our audience who may be, dealing with that themselves, and what are some simple things that they can do, or resources that they can access as they navigate it?
The word PTSD, I think, is the new ADHD. People just throw that word out a lot. True post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder. So an explanation that I love of memory is that it is biology plus biography stored properly is a memory. So your biology is all of the sensations that your body has when an event happens. And then biography is the narrative that you put to that experience and all of the sensations that you felt. And then it gets stored in the hippocampus and it's there. And if you want to retrieve it, you can, but it's stored with its narrative. When something traumatic happens, and it's why soldiers come back with such difficulty, is something happens that's so horrific that you can't stand to revisit it, to think about it, to put a narrative to it. And it's also usually a situation that is life-threatening, or you're viewing something like that. So the emotions or the body sensations that you've had are things like hypervigilance, like your eyes dilating, you start to hyperventilate, you're breathing faster, your blood, your pulse rate is increasing. Those are all the kind of sensations that go along with those big traumas. And they all have a purpose. The purpose is to keep us safe. So our body is designed that if you're in a traumatic situation, you're in a life-threatening situation, you want to be hypervigilant. You want your eyes to take in as much as possible, so your eyes dilate. You want to oxygenate your muscles, and so you breathe faster and your blood pumps faster so that you have more strength and ability to either defend yourself or get away. So those are normal body sensations that we're supposed to have. The problem is, it is such a horrific incident that you can't stand to think about it. So it stays in what's called the amygdala, whose job is to keep us safe. But those body sensations are going to get stored, and they're going to get stored with other kind of things that happened at the time, kind of a narrative that just gets put with them that is just other stuff that was happening at the time. And so that's why those weird sensations will pop up in the oddest circumstances that you can't control, and you can't control it. And the whole purpose is that if we feel threatened, we need to do something. And that's what our brain is telling us, is there's a threat here, do something. But with PTSD, the sensations that we felt are a lot of times attached to things that are not threatening, but they were maybe, I always characterize it this way. So say you're sexually assaulted on a warm spring evening where the grass has just been cut, and so it's kind of dark and there's a smell of fresh grass, and that's a traumatic situation. And so you have all of those dread feelings and everything that are put together with dimming light and the smell of cut grass, which can mean then that any time in your life that you're on a nice spring evening where the light's dimming and the grass has just been mowed, and all of a sudden you have feelings of dread, you start hyperventilating, and you don't know what the heck's going on.
Mm.
Those are the kind of intrusive and arousal symptoms that happen with PTSD. So other things that happened to me, I had intrusive memories. I would start feeling like somebody was climbing on me, and I couldn't stop that feeling. You have avoidance. You start avoiding anything that triggers any of those symptoms. But for me, it just got to the point where everything was triggering the arousal symptoms. And the other thing is a lot of negative self-thinking, like you just really beat yourself up. You have negative thinking, mood issues, things like that. So those are all pieces of post-traumatic stress disorder. And not only a small portion of people who have trauma will have PTSD. A lot of people will go through trauma, but they will deal with it. And it's a lot of times people who are more open about talking about things in their lives, and they will talk about traumas until they process it and store the memory correctly. But it's just those of us that decide, I'm just going to bury this and power on because I'm tough, who can get into trouble. And you can understand that the kind of horrific thing that veterans deal with are things that just are not something they want to revisit. So, but that's post-traumatic stress disorder.
Talk to me just for a few minutes about the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder.
So cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive processing therapy are generally the therapies, especially for things like rape or like traumatic accidents, things like that they use. There are different things that they use with veterans because you don't want to revisit those situations particularly. So there are other therapies that they can use. There's also EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which helps you go back to those kind of memories without them feeling so awful while you're talking about them. What's important with a cognitive behavioral therapist is that they let you stay in control of what you're talking about. So my therapist said to me early on, he said, control is vitally important to you. So I'm not going to control the session. You can talk about anything you want to talk about. So for somebody this is why it took me so long, because for somebody who is so committed to hiding what I was thinking, it would be very difficult to walk into a session and let him know anything that I was thinking about, because then he would know what I spent my time thinking about, and I didn't want anybody to know that. But a good therapist, like I would say, if I really couldn't talk, I would just say, I can't talk, I need help. And then he would start helping me to talk. But he would let me start. If I started anywhere, it would start the conversation, and he would just ask me questions or give me his perspective on what I had just said. And what it taught me was that it was safe to talk. And that is really difficult. So the first therapist I ever had was right after it happened when I was in my 20s. She controlled the conversation. She asked me questions about specific things. I felt very judged. And after seeing her twice, I just quit. My older brother said, you shouldn't feel worse when you go to therapy. You should feel better. So I quit. That was a really good decision because she was controlling the narrative. But with a good therapist, it's somebody that will help you to talk, make you feel comfortable talking, and make you feel safe.
Before, I mean, I could talk to you for another hour. It's just been so informative, and I know our audience is just going to really gravitate towards this information. Tell us where we can get your book and how we can find you online if people want to connect with you.
So my book is Braving Therapy, and it is on Amazon primarily. I mean, you can order it from bookstores too. I don't think too many bookstores are carrying it right now. What I have found I don't love doing is marketing. So it's on Amazon, and you can read the reviews. There are quite a few reviews on Amazon to get a gist of it. And it's by Linda Feig Knipe. So my name is here. I have a website, lfeigknipe.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook under Linda Feig Knipe.
That's perfect. And we will have all your connections we will have in the show notes as well. So people will have links that they can just click on and find you.
Great.
This book is really important. And I'm thinking how I wish that I had this book when I first started going to therapy. I think that it would have helped me tremendously.
Oh, thank you for saying that. The goal of the book was therapy's hard. You have to be brave, and you will be the hero in your own story if you stick it out.
Yeah. I love that. Before we go, I need to read one more quote. I didn't find my voice all at once. I found it in fragments, in the quiet, in the breaking. That is just such a beautiful quote from you. And, the title of this podcast is Broken Beautiful Me, because I'm trying to tell the stories of people like you and my other guests who have faced some of the most difficult things in life and have made a conscious decision to be open about healing. And that makes us stronger than we were before. I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. And I hope you come back again. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Oh, I would love that, Kelly. Thank you. Because we didn't talk about gratitude at all.
I know. We just, I had questions there about gratitude, because that's my jam. But we will definitely have to do that when you come back.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Linda. Appreciate you being here.